Greetings, beloved family. Dr. Valentine here. First, I'd like to give a shout out to Brother King Simon, Brother Irritated Genie, Brother Tam, and to all those who worked so diligently to make this event happen. And although I can't be there with you in body, I'm certainly there with you in spirit, mind, and soul, in full support of this, the first straight Black Family Pride Convention. Family. Now there's a word, a concept, an archetypal principle of nature that has come under the most vicious attack over the last 50 years, particularly with the rise of Amazonian feminism, the one that was backed and funded by Rockefeller himself. And the overall impact it has had on the relationships of Black men and women and the Black community at large has been nothing short of devastating. Now, for all of you who continue to believe that the all-out governmental Hollywood media support of feminism, gay pride, and transgenderism is just a natural evolution of an evolved society, just something based on civil rights, think again. This campaign has been a well-funded, well-planned tactical socializing protocol implemented to institute a covert policy of what I call passive-aggressive genocide. The final stages of this plan was formularized in 1996 at the Women's World Convention held in Beijing, China. One of the fundamental and most basic of policies that they wanted to see implemented was the elimination of all gender differences in the languages of human beings worldwide. Just think about that. They wanted to phase out all gender-related words from primary schools, from the media, from literature. Gender-related words such as father, mother, husband, wife, brother, sister, son, daughter. And they wanted to replace these words and make the words like caregiver, person, life partner, relative. They wanted to make these words a substitute to completely neuter the entire human race, to take away the principle of gender, to remove what is natural in nature, and to replace it with a concept, a twisted one, albeit a twisted concept of nature. Now, this and much more was to be actually the next step in implementing what the lesbians and gay rights activists and authors had begun promoting and publishing. Their literature had flooded the social landscape over 60s, the 70s, 80s, and the 90s. And what they had to say was then now instituted as policy in government. It became socialized first through the media and entertainment, but then it began to slowly become law. Now, those of us who are pretty much not aware of what feminism instituted and what it stood for, and those feminist prophets, and those who were the harbingers of this particular type of lifestyle and this mentality that they wanted us to adopt, I have here in my book, The Wounded Womb, a few quotes from the feminist authors of the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, and the words that they spoke in their literature, and listen to what they had to say and see if from back then, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, if you don't think that what they put forward is not being implemented as policy today. From a book called One Blood, Prophecies and Discoveries on Sexual Politics by a woman named Andrea Dworkin. She says, and I quote, "The cultural institutions which embody and enforce those interlocked aberrations, for instance, law, art, religion, nation states, the family, tribe, or communities based on fathers' rights, these are real and they must be destroyed." End quote. From an author by the name of Sheila Cronin on the institution of marriage. She says, and I quote, "Since marriage constitutes slavery for women, it is clear that the women's movement must concentrate on attacking this institution. Freedom for women cannot be won without the abolishment of marriage." End quote. Alison Yeager, in her work Feminist Politics and Nature, says, and I quote, "Marriage enforces women's dependence on men. It enforces heterosexuality, and it imposes the prevailing masculine and feminine character structures on the next generation." End quote. So what she's saying is that the mother and father principle of family, where the male and female heterosexuals who brought forth a family, who brought forth children, cannot propagate that, should not propagate that, should not be allowed to propagate that particular structure into the next generation. So what are you saying? What are you taking away from the individual family? What are you now trying to control or trying to eliminate? Andrea Dworkin goes on to say, "Heterosexual intercourse is pure formularized expressions of contempt for women's bodies." End quote. Simone de Beauvoir says in an interview at the Saturday Review, June 14th, 1975, quote, "No woman should be authorized to stay home and raise her children. Women should not have that choice because it is their choice. If it is their choice, and if such a choice exists, too many women will make that one." In other words, remove your choice to be a mother, a stay-at-home mother, and raise your children. Homeschool your children. That cannot be, because 90%, and she admits it here, 90 to 99% of women would rather stay home and raise children. They would rather stay home and be wives and mothers. In The Dialectic of Sex, 1970, by Shulamith Firestone, she goes on to say, and listen to this, I quote, "To ensure the elimination of sexual classes requires the revolt of the underclass, that is, women, and the seizure of control of reproduction. Restoration of women's ownerships of their body, as well as feminine control of all human fertility, including both the new technologies and all the social institutions of childbearing and child-rearing. And just as the end goal of socialist revolution was not only the elimination of the economic class distinction itself, so too the end goal of feminist revolution must be, unlike that of the first feminist movement, not just the elimination of male privilege, but of sex distinction itself. Genital differences between human beings would no longer matter culturally." End quote. She goes on to say, "The heart of a woman's oppression is her childbearing and child-rearing roles." End quote. Now listen to this. Firestone goes on to say, "The natural is not necessarily a human value. The natural is not necessarily a human value. Humanity has begun to outgrow nature. We can no longer justify the maintenance of a discriminatory sex class system on the grounds of its origin in nature. Let me read that again. We can no longer justify the maintenance of a discriminatory sex class system on the grounds that of its origin in nature. Indeed, for pragmatic reasons alone, it begins to look as if we must get rid of nature. End quote. Anne Ferguson and Nancy Folbray said, quote, "Gay and lesbian culture can also be looked on as a subversive force that can challenge the hegemonic nature of the idea of family. In order for the subversive nature of gay cultures to be used effectively, we have to be able to present alternative ways of looking at human relationships." End quote. Alison Yeager goes on to say, "The end of the biological family will also eliminate the need for sexual repression. Male homosexuality, lesbianism, and extramarital sexual intercourse will also be viewed in the liberal way as alternative options. Instead, even the categories of homosexuality and heterosexuality will be abandoned and eliminated. The very institution of sexual intercourse, where male and female each play a well-defined role, will disappear. Humanity could finally revert to its natural, polymorphously perverse sexuality." End quote. And lastly, and see that this is not something that you are seeing every day with the institution of ever new horrific ways of twisting the human equation. A woman by the name of Heidi Hartman says, "How people propagate the species is socially determined. The strict division of labor by sex, a social invention common to all known societies, creates two very separate genders. It thus helps to direct their sexual needs and helps to ensure biological reproduction. But in more imaginative societies, biological reproduction might be ensured through other technologies." End quote. With that, beloved brothers and sisters, I task with you to continue this particular event into the next generations to come. It's most important. We are at a threshold. If we do not at least make a stand to show that we are in solidarity as people who believe that nature dictates the law, not man, that all things in man is based upon the structuring of natural occurrences. And what is not natural is two men cohabiting together and calling that a family, and taking a child or adopting a wayward child and saying that is a family. The word family has been used in so many ways: extended family, the family of nature, the family of man. But the fundamental principle upon which those extensions are rooted is now being uprooted. We cannot have that. So I congratulate you once again, Brother King Simon, in bringing forth this most important event. To all my brothers and sisters who are in attendance, Shemim Hotep, love, light, and transcendence.